Well, with pollution concerns on the minds of many parents, many city dwellers, our dirty air is rising to the top of people's consciousness. But is it actually wafting over to those who could, if they wanted to, clean it up? Are our politicians taking note of our toxic atmosphere? You're watching Roundtable. I'm David Foster. There is a very lucky 10% who don't, but more than 90% of the world's population apparently breathes dirty air. It's pollution deemed unsafe by the World Health Organization. But as populations expand and urban sprawls move out, can we see, quite literally, a brighter future?
They get us from A to B, but what damage are they doing on the way? Road traffic is the biggest contributor to air pollution in residential areas, but are governments doing enough to remove the heavy polluters from our roads? In China, air pollution is declining but remains 3 times above World Health Organization limits. This month, Diwali fireworks celebrations in New Delhi, India, saw pollution soar to 20 times higher than safe levels. And in the UK, the government has been taken to the High Court 3 times and lost over the inadequacy of its plans. How can people ensure their elected representatives will nurse polluted communities back to health?
Let us get talking. This is the second part of 2 on air pollution. I'm pleased to say that staying with us via Skype from York in the United Kingdom, we have Johan, Kuylenstierna, Policy Director at the Stockholm Environment Institute. New arrival in Lahore in Pakistan, we have Ahmad Rafay, an environmental lawyer and activist, also staying with me on this occasion at the round table. Kiely, clean air campaigner of Friends of the Earth, and Liza, Selley, air pollution toxicologist at King's College London. Thank you for staying with me, you three. Ahmad, very warm welcome to the programme. You're in Lahore. Last programme we have Arvind in Delhi. He told us it was pretty nasty there. What's it like with you, the air quality today?
My meter tells me that the PM 2.5 reading right now is 200. The legal limit in Pakistan for a 24-hour period is 35 micrograms per cubic meter. So we are severely in multiples beyond the legally acceptable pollution limit in our.
Okay, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to stay with you. We're going to persevere, and we're going to blame the poor quality of our connection. We can hear what you're saying, but the picture's not that good. We're going to blame it on air pollution, and you're going to tell me if it is 7 times the limit today, and Pakistan's constitution, I think, says people have a right to clean air, what's being done about it? Because that's really what this programme's about.
Well, we've had an election in August, and a new government hasn't just finished its 100 days. So there has been, you could say, no one steering the car for the last 3 months on this. But that's not to say that nothing has happened. We've had a very proactive judiciary, a High Court and a Supreme Court, that formed a smog commission of experts that have formulated a 17-point set of recommendations to improve air quality and combat the smog. This expert document forms the basis of the government's current action plan on what to do about the air quality.
Do you want to give us a summary of a couple of the main points on that 17-point plan, and then we can kick that around between us?
Sure. This would be what you would find just about anywhere else in cities that are trying to combat and improve their air quality. It's improvements in fuel qualities, addition of catalytic converters, and then we have in Pakistan industrial waste and industrial production, energy sources that are very poor. Also, we have something almost, you could say, characteristic of North India and Pakistan, which is routine crop burning. This is the burning of agricultural residue twice a year that leads to air quality issues. So there's a variety of, you could say, pollutants that cause air quality.
I suppose, and let's bring it back to the studio and also to Johan as well. The sort of burning of crops that Ahmad refers to, that would be similar to what we used to see during my childhood. We don't see anymore, which is stubble burning at the end of the harvest period, you know, when the remaining little bits of hay and straw were burnt off. We have made massive strides. Is that a fair assumption in the Western world, if you like?
Well, I think so, and there's been lots of positive steps, but there's still nowhere near enough that is being done. It's obviously very good that there's a 17 kind of point plan being developed in Pakistan, but over here in the UK, you know, we're not seeing the action that we need to get rid of kind of the most polluting fossil fuel kind of vehicles, petrols and diesels alike, and you know, we're not seeing the funding critically from the government because actually we know what the solutions are. We know what we have to do to
what are the solutions then?
Well, we can really fundamentally...
You can address this to Ahmed, who might be listening, environmental lawyer in Pakistan, and worth listening to. I think, you know, what the main things that we still need to do in this country are.
Well, fundamentally, we do need to get rid of diesel vehicles from the roads. That is one of the biggest and most serious contributors to the current air pollution crisis. But alongside that, you know, petrols are a problem as well. So as much as possible, the transition towards electric vehicles is going to be good for air pollution, but we're also dealing with a climate crisis as well. So lots of the emissions that come out not only harm people's health and well-being and their lungs and their heart, but also are damaging kind of the planet. So actually we can have a win-win kind of situation here, tackle climate change and you know, protect people from harmful air pollution.
Yeah.
So that's what we need, government action to drive that out. And we also need these things kind of called clean air zones across towns and cities to actually say, you can't, if your vehicle is so polluting, you can't actually drive it here. And of course, to make that kind of like possible, you need the alternatives to be available. You need better public transport. You need that cycling, walking infrastructure to be invested in as well.
As you describe it, as opposed to clean air zones where people would go and stand if they wanted to take a lungful of fresh air, they could get rather crowded, couldn't they?
Yes.
Efforts are being made in London, I know. We were having a bit of a natter between programmes about the number of electric buses that there are, because just behind us is Oxford Street, and you know, you see buses, well, it's not that they don't come along in threes, they come along in 200s down in Oxford Street. That's a step forward, isn't it? We've got electric buses on the road here, electric trains.
I think the new ones are electric. And we were talking as well before the show, actually. There's a bus that's being tested in, I think it's Southampton, and they've actually stuck a big filter on the top of it. So it goes along kind of gulping up the particles that it comes across.
Really?
So, yeah, so it's like a super low emission. It's even removing emissions.
But we could all
so imagine
have
if we,
that.
yeah,
Could
imagine
we
if we
not
had
all have that on every car we have?
Yeah, I mean, the cost would be something to think about, but it would be probably a good step
But isn't it a little bit like, see the lady behind me there in that picture? Isn't it like a sort of slightly more developed mask that you would put on that would just sort of capture the particles like this?
Yeah, so in a sense it's a very tight mesh.
Yeah.
And so it will capture the very tiny particles.
And this is happening in Southampton?
They're testing it. I think they've got one bus at the minute. I don't think they've analysed the results yet. But the idea is if this one works, they'll roll out a few more along the fleet. And then who knows, maybe we'll see them elsewhere.
Johan, is this the kind of lateral thinking that we're going to have to do?
I think what we have to do is get rid of the emissions. You know, and it's the emissions in the city. So yes, vehicles are an important part of it. But if you were to sort of ban all vehicles from a city, you're still going to have PM 2.5 air pollution. So, you know, if
help us with that. Those of us that don't follow this expertly.
I'm sorry.
You mentioned a particular number and a figure, PM. So to help us with what that is, just those of us that don't follow this closely.
Well, if you've got the PM 2.5 across London, I mean, the average annual is about, say, 13 micrograms per metre cubed. So a lot better than our colleagues experiencing in Lahore. But maybe half to two-thirds of that is actually a regional background, and then a third of it is actually from the pollution in the city. So, you know, the vehicles are an important part of it, and getting rid of diesel vehicles is important, moving to electric. We've also got to consider that we don't want to then power those electric vehicles from coal-fired power stations or oil-fired or even gas-fired power stations, which are releasing emissions which form particles which are blown back in the city. So,
yeah, but we also know that electric vehicles can be powered kinetically via a dynamo, and if you start them up in one particular way, perhaps using a very little bit of fuel, you can then power the battery as you go along. So there are ways round it, aren't there?
Well, I mean, what we need to do is to move towards electric vehicles, but at the same time have renewable electricity, which is powering those vehicles. And it's interesting to see that electric vehicles are actually taking off across the world. It's not just in Europe. In China, I think they got more electric vehicles than anywhere. And I know there's a soot-free bus policy in a lot of cities in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. So, you know, these things are moving forward. But we need to think holistically if we're going to tackle both climate change and air pollution at the same time.
Interesting mental picture of electric vehicles taking off, filling the skies in China. But I get what you mean. I mean, let me come to you and talk about the damage that is being done to future generations and why you think governments such as yours, and we'll talk about the British government in just a moment, and what's happening where you work, Johan, why you think it's absolutely vital. Mental health problems, etc.?
That's an excellent question. In Pakistan at present, one of the problems we have in combating air quality issues is lack of information. What we don't have are surveys and studies. Believe it or not, we do not have surveys and studies that link air pollution to health issues, nor have we conducted any surveys of whether or not there have been spikes in hospital admissions during smog events. Now, without this data, policymakers have not been given that evidence that they need to be able to make this a public health emergency.
It was difficult to see you, but now you're breaking up a little bit. But I think we all got the point that you're making, is that people need to have more information about the damage that these pollutants can do, because then they'll make sensible decisions, one would hope. So, Johan, you were at this World Health Organization summit meeting in Geneva not so very long ago. Do you get the impression that things are changing?
Yes, I do. I think that there is a bigger appetite for people to take air pollution seriously and start doing things about it. You know, this is not now just a European, North American, Japanese issue where people are trying to do stuff. People throughout, you know, people are worried in Africa. You know, you've got the highest urbanization rate in the world in Africa, and they're worried about their air pollution. In Asia, we've got really bad air pollution, and people want to do something about it. And I was involved in a report with the United Nations Environment Programme looking at the potential of a limited number of available solutions to reduce air pollution across Asia, and you can really make a big difference not necessarily by spending much more than people are spending at the moment on air pollution reduction. So, you know, if
give us a bit more detail on that.
Well, there were three groups of measures, and it's quite interesting. One is that, you know, in Asia, like in China, they've done a lot of work on industrial big sources like power stations and big industrial facilities. Now, if that was, implemented across Asia, where it isn't implemented at the moment, then that would have a certain improvement. But it would more or less maintain the current level of air pollution. So it wouldn't get worse, even though people are getting richer, but it wouldn't improve it. And then there's another bunch of measures which are more on these distributed sources we discussed earlier, like the ammonia from agriculture and the burning of biomass, and tackling lots of these small sources. And then the last group is actually looking at those measures which cross over between different development priorities, like sustainable energy and modern energy services for all, and climate change. And if you then implement all of these three packages of measures, 25 measures in all, then you can substantially reduce the air pollution and bring 1 billion people into clean air in Asia.
And you could prove to those people who would have to spend the money, whether they be corporations or perhaps governments, that this is not financially ruinous, could you?
Yes, because an economic analysis of all the measures was made, and it was something like a 30% increase compared to what people are paying at the moment, and it's only a small. So compared to the increase, just the increase in wealth in Asia over the next 10 years, it would only be 5% of that increase in wealth. So, you know, people are getting richer across Asia. If they spent 1/20th of that increase in wealth on air pollution, then they could dramatically reduce.
But I suppose it depends from which point you start. If you've become wealthier, if you started from a very low point, you might be unwilling to give up any of the advances that you'd made if you'd only gone so far. But Liza, can I ask you this? You started in pesticides.
Yes.
Let's say before you went on to diesels and brake bits and all that, which you believe are causing problems. Now, I know ammonia is still a major problem, but do you believe with the banning or the of so many dangerous chemicals such as DDT and so on, that we were able to achieve with fertilizers and pesticides in a short period of time what could be achieved when it comes to air pollution? That was a success story to some extent, wasn't it?
Yeah, so it was a big sort of uphill thing. So I was working in Greece in the rural community, and I was trying to teach people about the effects that pesticides can have on their health if they're inhaling it, if they're getting it on their skin. And they were showing me how they were using it. And it was difficult to see how they would get the same yield if they were just using organic methods. But I think they also, that the awareness of what was happening to their health wasn't quite so high. So I think, I don't know, we need to give across more of that, and then it will improve. People will say, well, perhaps I'd try this organic. So how did we, to some extent, sort of win that battle, whereby we persuaded people that organic food may have been maybe slightly more expensive, but it is ultimately better for you? How did we win that, and therefore could we apply that lesson to air pollutants?
I think we have to, and I think, as Johan said, it is about moving towards a more sustainable future in general. It is about saying to people, actually, your health will benefit. You know, your family and you know, children will be able to breathe kind of fresh air pretty much for the first time. It's about a world they can live in as well, because this is linked to climate change as well.
Okay, but give us the reasoning behind the achievement with pesticides and organic food and the movement away from industrialization of food sources. Give us how you think that worked, and therefore how we could apply it.
Well, I think, as Liza said, it was around people understood just how it affected them and the damage that it could have done. Well, I think it's through kind of, you know, it's having conversations like this, actually, and we need many more up and down the country, people wise to the levels of pollution that they are breathing in, because people just do not know. I remember going to Whitechapel Road in London, and it was actually one of the most polluted roads in London at the time, and we asked people there, what do you think of air pollution? They went, oh, it's fine, and that was a few years ago. They had no clue.
You can't see it, can you?
Exactly, because you couldn't see it. But if you went there now, I think you would actually see a massive increase in numbers of people go, actually, I've heard about it. I can't always see it, but I know it's really bad here and it's damaging me. That's what we need far more of.
Yeah, more talking to people, more social media campaigns, just making it more visible.
I mean, I'll come to you in a minute and we'll try the Skype connection again. But Johan, I was quite interested because you represent a Scandinavian organisation. You happen to be in York at the moment. But I was quite interested in looking at the maps that sort of made me feel like I had a little bit of understanding of this. That Norway, Finland, Sweden, Denmark all seem to be setting one of the best sets of examples when it comes to air pollution decreasing. How are they doing that?
Oh, I think it is one of the better, you know, air pollution situations in the world, but it was very bad. If you go back to the 1950s, you know, air pollution in Stockholm was terrible. So, you know, it's political will, taking action, and that's what we need in all these other countries as well. So one thing I'd like to mention, though, is that you mentioned things like banning of agricultural burning. There are many countries in Asia who have banned agricultural burning, but they don't have the institutional capacity to actually go and implement, make sure that people don't burn their crops. And this is a problem when you go out of Europe and North America to many of the countries. They don't have enough resources into the people who are supposed to make sure that people are maintaining their vehicles, not burning their crops, that sort of thing. So one thing is, you know, to get the policymakers to agree to take a measure or ban something, and the next thing is to make sure that there's enough institutional capacity to actually implement it. Otherwise, nothing will happen.
The question for each one of you right now is, look, mankind produces waste. We are dirty animals. We're not going to be able to make this a clean, sterile world, are we?
I think we have to, because fundamentally we are going in a very unsustainable direction, and we're not going to be able to live on the planet. So we have to clean up our act, we have to clean up transport, we have to clean up the way that we, conduct business and the way that we power things. It's going to have to be done, and the benefits are there. It's about making the planet livable, and it's about improving and protecting people's health and making sure lives are not cut short unnecessarily, as they are being done with air pollution.
You know, I have a theory that stress is one of the biggest killers in the world, and perhaps if we worry about every single thing that could go wrong in our lives, we'd never do anything. Perhaps it's best just to accept the fact that we are dirty beasts, as I say. We're always going to leave something horrible behind, and just get on with it.
It doesn't have to be stressful, though. There are very small changes we can all make. For example, if you have to go into town in your car, run several errands at once. Don't pop in 3 times. Go for a weekly shop instead of nipping in every day. There are very stress-free and simple ways that we can reduce our burden on the air quality problem.
OK. Johan, yeah.
I was just going to say, I think that air pollution reduction in Europe is one of the success stories. It proves that we don't have to be dirty beasts. It's actually, sulfur emissions have gone down by over 90% since the 1980s. So, we've shown we can clean up the air. What we need to do in Europe is to go the extra mile, move to electric vehicles, address all the things that we haven't.
And are these things being done? Is there a government will for it? I'll go to Ahmad. We've redialed. We'll go to Ahmad in Lahore in just a moment. He's told us about his government. But first of all, your impression of the Scandinavian governments, and you're in England at the moment, and then the UK impression here. Is there a will?
I think that there is an increasing will to deal with these issues. Also, the way that technology is going, we know how to deal with it. I think that it's just keeping up that pressure and reducing those emissions. But the big impacts are in Asia, Africa, and not so much Latin America, but certainly Asia and Africa. Those are the places where we need more action and more awareness and more resources spent.
Well, I mean, more than 50 countries in Africa. Africa is not a country. Africa is a continent. Getting all of them to work in harmony is going to be a pretty difficult job. And the same goes across Asia, doesn't it?
Well, yes, it's a big job, but because we know it can be done, then and countries in Asia and Africa want to deal with it. So it is a question of working with them, improving their capacity, and making sure they understand how serious it is.
OK. Ahmed, we'll give it another go. We can still see you. I could hear you just a second ago trying to say something. You've got a 17-point government plan at the moment. Who's leaning on Imran Khan and his cohorts to make sure this happens? Because it's going to cost a bit, isn't it?
It is going to cost a lot of money. And that is one of the challenges, how you leverage the private sector and incentivize them so that they start investing in green technology. This will be a challenge for Pakistani economists and economic planners to bring the environmental sustainability.
OK, guys, I just took my earpiece out to see whether you could hear what Ahmad was saying, and it's jolly difficult if you're hearing it in the studio. I'm getting it through a thing in my ear, and I can hear it pretty clearly. He says it's going to be costly, but you have to take that on the chin. When it comes to, let's talk about London, since that's where we're sitting at the moment. What kind of pressure was Ken Livingstone when he was mayor, Boris Johnson when he was mayor, Sadiq Khan now that he is mayor? What kind of pressure are they under, and are they listening?
Well, I think we saw the introduction of the congestion charge, which did have a positive impact on air pollution. And, obviously benefits are London could move and actually just wasn't a constant kind of gridlock.
It still is.
Well,
seriously, it still is. You don't want to drive in this.
There are fundamentally there's less cars in London than there were before, but there's still massive amounts of way to go. And I do think that Sadiq Khan, current mayor, he's spoken lots, hasn't he, about air pollution. He's talked about how he himself has developed asthma, and I feel like he has a personal.
He's the son of a bus driver who caused a problem in the first place.
Well, it's interesting if it's actually people that are, driving in London as well that can be exposed to huge amounts of air pollution. I've spoken to a few taxi drivers who constantly say how many kind of coughs and wheezes they kind of develop, and that is because they are just sitting in such a toxic environment. So if you can get taxi drivers on board, I think you're going to have quite a good success with this.
Are you really frightened that either you or your children, when you have any, are going to have to walk around London wearing masks, or are you hopeful?
I do feel encouraged that the government is trying to look at a wider selection of pollutants. There's been a lot of focus on diesel, but in their recent plans that they've set out for air quality, they've asked researchers to come to them with information about brake dust, about wood smoke, about all these different things, and ammonia. So I think that they are looking quite holistically at air pollution. So I'm quite hopeful that in generations to come,
we got smokeless coal at one point, but it's very difficult to get smokeless wood, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
You're pretty hopeful, and you're giving them your idea.
I'm feeling positive.
Okay. Well, that's smashing. Listen, thank you very much indeed. Ahmed, we persevered because you had a very important point. Yeah, thanks for the thumbs up. You had a very important point to make, and we're glad that we were able to hear from you. Good luck in getting through what you can and should get through in Pakistan. Certainly a very interesting time for your country. Johan, thank you for staying with us for both of these programs. Good luck with the Stockholm Environment Institute, and to you, Friends of the Earth and a toxicologist. Listen, it couldn't have been more interesting for me. I have the great pleasure of just sitting here absorbing what I'm told by fascinating people day after day after day. You can breathe a little bit more easily now, in a certain sense, because we will be back with another program, but this one is done. From me, David Foster, from my guest, thank you for watching. We'll see you next time, I hope. Bye-bye.